Welcome back to Mastering Change. Today's episode explores an approach to healing that may feel familiar, but looks entirely different. I'm joined by Laura Patryas, a Nondual IFS practitioner who sees our inner parts not as problems to fix, but as expressions of a deeper awareness. Laura shares how trauma disconnects us from presence and how even the therapist part of us can get in the way of what's truly healing. We talk about non-dual IFS, the difference between empathy and compassion, and why cultivating presence, not just insight, can change everything. Let's begin. Dr. Laura Patryas, it's my pleasure to welcome you to the podcast today. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much, Anna. I'm so happy to be part of this exciting venture.
Most of our regular listeners might recognise that it's only me today, so I'm going to play all roles in the podcast, and I shall start us by using Esther Perel's card game. Where do we begin? I'll draw a card at random from the pile, and that'll just be a way of us connecting on a human level before we kind of go into who you are, what you do, and how you relate to the field of trauma, mental health and well-being. So, the most expensive mistake I've ever made, ...
Oh my gosh. So this is perfect for me because I have quite frugal parts, quite minimalistic parts. So that doesn't resonate much for my psyche. So I'm having to actually think really hard. The most expensive mistake I've ever made. Oh, goodness gracious. Nothing is coming right off the bat for me. I suppose this is a really fantastic way to say that I don't tend to buy expensive things. I really see joy in the little tiny things. I'm not quite sure if I can even answer that.
What if we looked at expense rather than materialistic?
In a psychotherapeutic realm, yeah.
Yeah, what's cost you in something that you value more than money?
This has to be, so this comes easy. This comes really super easy now. This has to be in my role as a parent. 100%. So as a trauma-informed therapist and a parent, I of course know all the ins and outs. And so occasionally I do find that a part of me does come through that is less than perfect. Less than that kind of gentle, kind, loving. I kind of hear my own mother's voice coming through. And the moment I see my daughter's physicality change in response to my part, I know. In that moment, it's like a little wake-up call. It's like a feedback, and it tells me, I've gotten blended with a part of me, and I don't have to. And sometimes she will tell me, because she's been brought up with a mom who does IFS, and she'll say, Mummy, are you blended with your angry part?
I love it. That's so smart.
I'm not right. And I absolutely celebrate her voice, her ability to speak up for her needs. You know, that's a sign of safety right there. Something that I didn't have when I was growing up. So I think the most expensive mistakes for me happen in parenting. 100%.
I can so relate to that. What you mentioned about posture or gesture, I remember speaking to Pat Ogden of sensory motor psychotherapy, and always have been highly attuned to environments and situations, and so really being able to read a room to like you said in secondary school, often to survive those situations. That is where I know that became a real, what is now a superpower, but that sense became attuned. And I can use that now in parenting, as you've described.
Yeah.
And it really is that those two things resonated so deeply. The expense of knowing that you can't be perfect and wanting to be perfect for those children, and when those moments happen, and then the ability to know when those moments have happened by virtue of you being able to read really subtle cues, which, like I say, I do now definitely understand to be a superpower when it's, when you've got the kind of safety and the ability to use it in that way. But that was a great answer. That was such a great answer because
Well, it just
material.
came, right? It just came. I was like, ah, yes, it must be in the moments of time when I get blended with a part that is trying to keep me safe. And it's actually what it's doing is it's trying to heal something from my past. So something in the present moment triggers this part. It's activated. It's playing out. And all I need is as you say, this little subtle shift in her physicality to let me know I'm blended with a part. And to also catch any, and this doesn't happen now, but previously there would have been the mom guilt, right? The moment I feel like I've messed this up, now I'm going to traumatize my child for life. She's going to have to go and find her own therapist. It's like, Laura, it's fine. Now this is such a fantastic opportunity to repair, to get down on her eye level and say, yeah, you're right. I blended with a part.
Great. And imagine if all children were equipped to have that kind of safety to be able to express that recognition of something not feeling quite right.
And
And
to be able to challenge me as a parent, because of course children look up to parents as though they're kind of godlike figures. Right?
Mhm.
Because capital self S self cannot be felt in the body at such a young age. We see it from our parents, and so we hope that our parents are self-led. But if they're not, we can't quite tell, is this them or is this us? So we tend to blame ourselves. It
Mm.
must be that I've upset mummy. And so the repair moment is vital because it really helps her to see, no, you're right. Mummy got blended with a part and now we can work through it. And it's just magic. I actually really welcome moments like that now. They seem to be um, quite expensive moments because I was kind of going into that self blame and kind of maybe a little bit of shame. And now I just see, oh, great, we've caught it. What a fantastic opportunity for us both to learn. Because as I'm a parent, I'm also learning on the job. This is the only job that you don't get given a manual for, that you don't go to college for. And yet,
Absolutely.
it's the most important one.
Yeah, every day's a school day with children.
It is.
That's
It
for
is.
sure. Would you mind, just before we go talking about your work in this space, you touched on it really briefly there. I think from your own childhood experiences, what compelled you to this field, to this work?
100%. Well, it's the wounded healer, yes? We have to have, we go around trying to find the remedy for for the thorn in our side. And that's what gives us that, as you say, the superpower. It's a superpower. It's that exquisite attunement, that nuance that we can see. We kind of read in between the lines. Um, I I was probably an HSP, a highly sensitive person as a child. Um, I was quite an empathetic child. I've had a lot of feelings. Okay? And and the world, as it does, it comes and it kind of squashes everything down and and so then I've had to exile parts of myself. And actually, as I've healed my own trauma, um, as I'm doing client work, I'm healing my own trauma too. So it's a mutual thing. And so for sure, going through moments of trauma in my own childhood, going through moments of feeling shut down, the feeling like I'm too much.
Mm.
I just, in therapy sessions, what I love to get across to clients or get across to an audience that I'm talking to is that you're not too much. You're not too much. And gosh, if I could write that on every place that I could, you're not too much. So it's from my own wounds that this kind of drive to want to not just to heal my own wounds, but also to to help others find that healing.
That you are not too much. It's really
It's just
interesting.
huge.
It really resonates, but also you hear quite a lot, you are enough. So there's this kind of you are enough and you are not too much. I think there's this, like you say, there's this kind of need to conform to very narrow confines of either not enough or too much. And it's kind of how we can kind of recalibrate, not that kind of narrow definition and window as you described that makes everybody feel closed down or not, from either perspective.
Well, it feels like kind of an either or, right? You're either not enough or you're too much. Well, where's the in between both of those? That's where life is. That's where the authentic self is. That's where creativity and play is, right? In between those two edges, that's where presence is.
Great.
And this is why I'm here, because I'm letting myself play. I'm letting myself really step into this role and this light. I have to say, it's beautiful.
Wonderful. Okay, I think that's a great time, Laura. If you wouldn't mind introducing yourself and in your own words, just explaining briefly what it is that you do, and then we'll dive in.
So I'm Dr. Laura Patryas, and I'm a lecturer here at the University of Manchester. I did a PhD in psychophysics, which is an area that looks at how does the brain make sense of the visual scene. And it's all about these cues that we've been talking about. How is it that we can decode this complex world and make some kind of a sense and meaning for us and find purpose in it? So that's the topic of area that I was looking at. And I'm currently looking at fractals, which is another beautiful area. It's looking at fractally modulated light and the impact of well-being on us. So currently I have this light glaring out at me. How would it be if we were to have it coming out in a fractal pattern whereby it makes my brain think that I'm in nature, that I'm in forest, as opposed to in an office setting? That's the kind of the research that I'm doing now. But the wounded healer piece is I am an internal family systems therapist. So I've trained in it. I'm level 3 certified, and I love it. This notions, I'm sure a lot of the viewers and the listeners will know about IFS. It's the latest kind of greatest tool for psychotherapeutic healing. And I just love the idea of parts. I love the idea of the consciousness flowing and these parts flying in and doing their little bits and shape shifting. It feels so intuitive. Because for so long, the paradigm's been very much left brain, right brain. And this fight, flight, freeze, fawn, and however many F's we keep adding to it. And it's beautiful. But actually, and even in attachment theory, we kind of classify people as secure or disorganized or this or that or anxious or avoidant. When we look at it through a systems point of view, through a parts point of view, we actually find that we have the capacity to be all of them. So when I'm talking to you, I might be securely attached and self-led. Occasionally when I'm talking to my mum, right, maybe another part of me comes out and I might be anxiously attached if I'm talking to someone else. So, and that is creativity. It's not necessarily a sign of trauma or that anything's wrong with you. Having multiple parts, being able to play in this realm of consciousness in the world with the inherent creativity that we are, I actually think is a sign of health. So in the IFS model, can you see I can go off because there's so much excitement here. But in the IFS model, we see parts not as fragments of the psyche, not as something that has kind of like split off as a result of trauma. We see them as more like waves on the surface of the ocean. So ultimately, the ocean is one big body of water, but within that, there are different waves, and each of them will reflect the light in its unique way. And don't we all, when we look at the surface of the ocean and when we, it has that beautiful surface and go, oh, how gorgeous that each of these waves has got this little glint. And that's what we are, each of us. And each of the parts on the inside of us has got this unique glint. So, but it would be true to say that parts can be burdened as a result of trauma. And this is where the psychotherapeutic healing comes in. Because all those parts are natural and inherent in the psyche, which is something that Carl Jung was really working on too. They can be burdened. And this is often why people come to therapy, because they're coming with burdened parts that have absorbed some ideas and beliefs about who they are, the lack of worth, that they're too much, that with so much shame, burdened with so much shame. That's what we want to heal. But the fact that we are flowing consciousness is beautiful to me.
Yeah, and I think it probably would be good for our listeners just to give an overview of IFS, which is obviously Richard Schwartz's internal family systems, is what you've been just describing for us, which I do think that most of our audience will be familiar with. And what you're saying, and that analogy of the ocean and its beauty and it's the kind of undulations and the different aspects, and also I do recall, and Dick says there are no bad parts. Those parts have come from a circumstance or a situation, and it's about really understanding, understanding that. Maybe you could give us what it was that drew you, because I know your work isn't just based in IFS. There's like another lens on it, another kind of layer that you've added that you've seen had great impact in your work. So maybe could you start by just explaining what drew you to IFS as a modality? Obviously, you're aware of much of what's available out there, but you've focused in on that to get to level 3. That's quite a commitment. And then how you've adapted that in your work with this additional layer.
Yeah. So I met IFS probably about 15 years ago. And I was seeking healing for some of my parts. I wasn't aware that they were parts then. And I turned up to something that I thought was actually family constellations, but it turned out being internal family constellations. So I turned up there complete novice. I had no clue. And it was powerful. It was some of the most, by that point, I'd already done, hours of talking therapy, CBT, the usual mill. And just that one session, working with my internal parts, had amounted to years of therapy. And in that session, I met my anxious part. And I have nothing but love for my anxious part, because when I saw her, it was like welcoming a piece of me that another part of me had exiled. When we say we abandon ourselves, what we're really saying is that the kind of the main manager part that is attempting to maintain some kind of order on the internal, it exiles the parts of us that kind of aren't so nice, that people don't really like. And so when I welcomed this anxious part, it was like a massive coming home. And from that moment, I was just an IFS. I need to learn everything about this. And in his books, Dick often talks about the tuning fork. that when you strike a tuning fork and place another one next to it, this one will start to ring in resonance with that tuning fork. And it was a bit like when I came across IFS, that resonance was there for me. It felt so intuitive. It's like, oh, of course, there's all these parts. Yeah. It just made sense. It made kind of an aesthetic, kinesthetic sense on the inside of me. And then I trained in it. But then what I found was that there were certain limits with it. There were certain limits where, as I saw it, the analogy of the parts, and I think Dick touches on this really, really well, that just as on the inside of us we have parts, you and I, Emma, are parts of a greater whole in turn, and 8 billion of us are a part of a greater whole. And so you can kind of copy and paste this model of internal family and really see that consciousness itself is fractal, the nested model of consciousness, parts within parts within parts within parts. It's a bit like the analogy of turtles all the way down. It's parts all the way down. And so you can talk about, and this is why Jungian work of archetypes and patterns makes so much sense, because it's just the same patterns being copied and pasted over and over and over again, maybe in expanding circles, so that we can include not just me as a human, not just you, not just people living in this country, but whole of the world, whole of the Milky Way, and whole of the galaxy and the universe. So this ties in. It's sort of a unifying way of looking the family, not just an internal family, not an external family, but how fundamentally consciousness is all organized. So it's a way, just the final point to mention here, IFS helps us to get to self-leadership. So that as opposed to being led from parts, and some of those parts are burdened, and even though there are no bad parts, the outcomes of some of the things that our parts do may not be so great or useful for ourselves or for our family. So IFS is a really fantastic tool to bring us to self-leadership.
Yeah.
Now, when we open it up, what we actually find is that it can even bring us to self-realization, which is one step further. It's a bit like if IFS had a level 4. That's what would go into level 4. It would be to look at the facet of self in the IFS model, look at the wave, and to see that actually through this interpersonal wave, we're all one.
So let's talk about that bit a bit more, than non-duality and that sense of self-realization. So if IFS is about understanding and leadership from a position of self rather than any of the parts,
Yeah.
then the non-dual bit is going to talk to us about the kind of benefit, that layer of getting to that kind of from self-leadership to self-realization.
Yeah. So the benefit is, as I see it in this world right now, you can be self-led, but you can be self-led in your own family or in your own community. But how about if you were to copy and multiply the self-leadership all over the world? For one, we would never have the type of polarization that we have in the different countries right now, right? Because you would be able to see that even though we're on the other sides of the world, a little bit like I'm a wave on this side of the ocean and you're a wave on that side of the ocean, but we're part of one ocean.
Mm-hmm.
So where can you say, now, oh, okay, it's no good to make harm here, but I can make harm over there. Well, no, we're linked by the very essence of water. So I think it would really help people to open up, even to expand outside of their own consciousness and see themselves as part of something greater. So it brings healing to a more global level.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because everyone's so closed into, there's so much, there's so many factors to consider. There's so many pulls on our time and attention so is that first part of self-leadership crucial in achieving self-realization? And this is a question both from an individual's work perspective, but also thinking about the majority of our audience are clinicians working with their clients. Is that kind of healing, at least to have leadership of self, a prerequisite for being able to do this work?
That's a great question. And the answer is yes and no.
Okay.
So occasionally people have an awakening to the kind of universal cosmic self, and then they need to travel backwards and pick up their pieces through psychotherapeutic work. Others work their way through psychotherapeutic work and get to a place of self-leadership, and then it opens up to a vaster ocean. So I think quite a lot of people nowadays, and especially with the advent, with psychedelics, and people are looking up online, and there's all sorts of breath work, right? People are trying things out. People are going there. And I have a lot of clients coming to me. They've had an awakening. Their psyche's completely blown open. And now they don't know how to put the pieces back.
Is that worrying, I guess? Because I do think in desperation, there's so much out there, isn't there, to try and some of it, like psychedelics without proper clinical, without proper preparation, dosage and integration in the clinical setting, could potentially close that whole space down again to the potential that it represents. Or things like holotropic breath work, which we can see. I remember sitting in a researcher session, and the names just escaped me, but talked about the developmental window that these things can open. And I think that's what you're describing, is there is this capacity,
Yes.
but without necessarily the understanding or the underpinning to be able.
That's right. That's right. So people will and this is why I say yes and no. People will come to self-realization from a naive point of view. So it's like they gain access to this huge wealth, but they don't really know, they don't have the tools to use this wealth in an embodied, present, real life lived way. Because that's what it's all about, really. Self-realization isn't about, well, I'm not a body, I might as well just climb out of this, and live in peace. That's not how it works. As I was telling you earlier, when I'm talking to my mum, there may well be a part of me that comes out that's a little bit on the anxious side. And this is why Ram Dass says, if you think you're enlightened, go spend a week with your family, right? Because you may have had this fantastic knowing yourself as the all, as this whole universe, but you now have to live with it. And a lot of people actually, when they open that box, they kind of go, oh, I don't know how to reintegrate into an embodied human now, which is a slightly more, it's a narrower version. It's like when you pass white light through a prism, it's only then that you see all of the different colors, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or how do you now reverse and go back into that white light with the knowing that you've got? And this is where IFS can be really, really good, because it can walk us back and go, let's now pick up all of the parts of you and reintegrate them into this larger ocean, this body of knowing. Yeah. Whereas for people like myself, I walked the psychotherapeutic therapeutic realm. So I've done the kind of the classic seeker vibe. So it's like, I did this and I did that and I saw a bit more. So it's like I opened the spectrum of that prismatic light one bit at a time. And so my entire inner family was kind of coming along with it. They were like, oh, that's so cool. I'm enjoying this. So there isn't what we would call in IFS a protective backlash, right? When clients go and do a psychedelic trip and they haven't had the kind of the prep work that is needed, psychedelics will bypass those manager parts that have had this sacred job for 30 years of keeping you safe. And now in comes the psychedelic, completely pushes everything aside and you're exposed. And then when you come back from that trip, the backlash is real. The parts are angry with you. Why have you done that? I felt so unsafe. It's as though I was back when the trauma happened to me. So it's a kind of the awakening piece must be for me prepped with some kind of integration work. And if it's not, then I'm afraid people have to go through the painful phase of walking back and picking up their various pieces. So it's both. They kind of both feed into each other, but in unique ways. You might come to it in a different way to what, there's 8 billion ways of self-leadership and 8 billion ways of self-realization.
That's really fascinating.
It really is.
This expansion that you're describing, this kind of non-dual self-realization, this part of the ocean and the cause and effect of a ripple over here and the connection over there. How do therapists integrate that sort of non-dual awareness and this bigger picture as you're painting into clinical work without kind of crossing into spiritual teaching, which is at the moment, again, a risk to the kind of, there's a lot of people that promise the kind of spiritual awakening and the woo-woo piece, whereas you're coming at this from a scientific background. You're a researcher and a clinician first. So when we think about, because what you're talking about from self-leadership to self-realization, the integration of parts work with this bigger picture piece, logically and intuitively feels profound. And there is this challenge of walking that line and maintaining being clinically robust.
Yes. Yeah. So it's not that when we do this non-dual IFS that we completely abandon IFS work. It's that it's all grounded in presence. And, Bessel van der Kolk says that lack of presence is the hallmark of trauma. When clients lose presence in the body, that's when we know they're not really able to act from a place of self-leadership. And that's one type of presence. You could say that's kind of like psychological and emotional bodily presence. But what I'm talking about is the presence even before that. In sort of Zen teachings, we say it's the face before you were born. What a curious thing to say, to wrap your head around. How did your face look before you were born? Is there a presence even before this embodied presence? And of course, that's it. For me, that is a yes. And it's not just in my dreaming mind. It's here, and it's it's here and now. And in IFS has already that built into it through the wave as a self. So IFS, Dick talks about self as a particle and self as a wave. And self as a particle is the kind of the facet of consciousness that blends with parts and uses the brain architecture, uses the brain wiring in order to manifest as this healthy, self-regulated person that I am right now. Self as a wave is the transcendental, transpersonal. It's the bit, you can say, where this conversation is held in. Yeah. Even though you and I happen to be in two different rooms, actually, for me, I can feel that there's a shared presence here. There's a third. And in therapeutic work, I cannot tell you enough how that third presence, that wave facet, time and time again, I've seen help client out.
It just takes me to that point around, so often lots of people that we speak to talk about the most important determiner of success is the therapeutic relationship. And I think that as you're describing this awareness and this presence is that bit that happens in between.
That's right. That's right. And it's the bit you can't place a finger on. You can't, there's no name for that. I mean, in IFS, we would call it self as a wave. It's the kind of transpersonal facet of consciousness. But it's felt, isn't it? Just felt. When I did my IFS level 1, level 2, level 3, there's of course the embodied self, but there's also the room itself. It's the kind of the energetic piece of it. And it's felt. It's not some kind of woo-woo where, oh, let me dream about this. For me, it's here. It's a lived reality. So the amounts of times we've borrowed or dipped into this presence, often I'll say to her, well, where does your part want to go? Doesn't feel safe with me. Doesn't feel I don't really have a guide, or doesn't feel safe with my parents. How about it's here in this presence here and now? Well, that feels nice. And I never question. If it feels great, we go with it. If that feels good and intuitive for you, we're just gonna go with it. And clients can often dip into this something here, presence. So for me, it's just another fact. For me, it's something that I know. But if we were to look at it as a psychotherapeutic tool, that is what it is. It's the presence in between, this shared presence that we have, where clients can dip into that and actually take a rest. Because on some level, clients are actually doing that. They're having to borrow our nervous system in that moment in time. They're having to resource through us, right?
And what if that you can also in that space have something that didn't exist before? That's really interesting. The idea that there's it's a different lens and a different way of describing that kind of that therapeutic relationship, because it starts to expand people to the wider possibility then of this idea of self-realization. If you can connect with that individual in that space and time, what if we start to kind of open that out into broader?
That is right. And you know what? People don't have such a hard time with it. If you explain to them, well, Wi-Fi works, you don't see it, but it helps you to connect and log online and meet with others. And microwaves, you can't see them, but it heats your food up. How about this energetic presence then? That is the backdrop of everything. And then people go, oh yeah, I hadn't even thought of that. On the level 1 IFS training, one of the final modules is you get to discern in between therapist parts and actually truly being self-led as a therapist. And actually therapist parts are really useful parts. They're the ones they've read all the books, they know all the theories. But as Carl Jung has his lovely quote, and I'm going to paraphrase here, know all the theories, read all the books, but when you are with another soul, just be another soul. There's something that's pointing us to this presence piece. Yeah. And so how do we know when we're blended with a therapist part versus self-led? The therapist part, more often than not, will have an agenda of some sort. So it will want an outcome. You might notice that your heart feels a little bit contracted. You might notice there's a little bit of thinking, sense of urgency up in the head. So there's definitely, there isn't that spaciousness. There isn't that pure total presence here, which is the ultimate healing facet here. Bessel van der Kolk says, I think I mentioned this in part 1, that lack of presence is the hallmark of trauma. So what are we going to need to do as therapists? We're going to need to really go in with presence first. So when you're being self-led, when there's spaciousness in your mind, you're kind of leaning back a little bit, you're not, leaning forward on top of your client. Yeah. You're leaning back. You notice you've got your feet on the floor, your body on the chair. And as I'm doing this, I'm also doing, reminding myself in this moment now, this is what I'm after. This is the kind of quality that helps me to be present, helps me to be really useful for myself and for others. And it's not that we let go of the therapist part. The self-led means self with utilizing the useful qualities, the inherent natural qualities of our parts. But the difference is that those parts are no longer burdened. So they're not coming in with that sense of urgency.
And how do you recognize when you're acting from self rather than from a part then?
It's definitely a felt thing. I can definitely feel it because when I'm with a part, there's a very subtle something that's wanting to have a need met. Yeah. Or maybe there's a part of me that's like, oh, you didn't quite do that right. You didn't say that right. And I go, oh, it seems there's a part of me here. And actually, we do therapy first and foremost. We model it. So if I do ever blend with a part, I make it an explicit thing. And I'll say, can we just pause for a second here? I feel I'm blended with a part. Just going to take a moment here. You don't have to do anything. I'm just going to wonder, oh, that feels better. I've just asked that part. And it's amazing. Because then the moment at which I've blended with a part, I might have noticed a very subtle contraction in my client's body. That's how this gets across, even on telehealth, even on Zoom. Clients are tuning into our parts too when they're coming in and taking over the session, sitting in the seat of consciousness. So when I say that, I kid you not, I see the client's body just soften up. And that's that exquisite present. So I'm always looking out. Am I being self-led here? Is there a cheeky little part here that's wanting to get an outcome? And it's not to punish or shame this part. It's to say, you know what? Let me park you for a little bit later on. I can do a little session with you just right now. Presence is what is needed here.
And I think that's something that's people are spending less time in real presence. If we think about in personal lives with Facebook, text messaging, WhatsApp groups, and in professional context, LinkedIn, Teams, Slack, all of these things that we're communicating, but not necessarily in a way that's present or in a way that's received in the moment that we're communicating in. And so that kind of ability to understand what it is to be present is actually somewhat being eroded by the very way in which we are interacting with others in the rest of our lives.
That is right. And often I find, clients will achieve their outcomes. They'll feel that they can now be calmer with their partner, with their children. They can be calmer at work. But what more often than not I find is that sometimes they'll say, there's still something in me that's calling out. There's something, and they'll use this word. They'll say, there's something soul deep it feels that has some unease here. And I think it is this this presence, being sitting with someone else. And as she doesn't have to be in person, can be over Zoom, but sitting with a person who has access to this exquisite presence. Something that, Carl Rogers talks about, something that Carl Jung talks about, something that transpersonal psychology tunes into, talks about presence, this transpersonal, it's a felt sense. Clients can feel, So it's almost like sinking into a hot bath. Now I can rest. Yeah.
Yeah, I've definitely experienced that just in conversation with you in the last 2 sessions. So, talk to me a little bit then about when you're in that acting from self and able to be present. When we last spoke, we talked about the difference between empathy and compassion.
Yeah.
Can you kind of contextualize? Because I think that was a really great way of drawing distinction or differentiating between, where we are and how we're acting.
This is actually a really useful piece because it tags on to the bit where you were saying, how do you know whether you're being self-led during a therapy session? So as you know, one of the C letter qualities of self is compassion. Now, how do we know whether we're being compassionate, empathetic, or sympathetic? And there is this little, the best way of putting it across is, let's imagine our client is down at the bottom of a well, right? They're completely flooded. They're completely hijacked by these parts. The parts have blended. How do we help them? Now, the therapist part might jump in with empathy. It will try and save this part. It will say, I know what this person's going through. I've been through the same thing. So you might be tempted to dive right at the bottom of the well. That may not necessarily be a useful thing for the client. It will feel very good for them. It will have some kind of therapeutic effect. But now you're both down at the bottom of the well with no way out, really. Yeah. So sympathy in this little scenario is a little bit like, it's a shame you're down at the bottom of the well. I'm up here. I hope you find a way out. It's a genuine hope. Not very useful for the person that's in the well. Empathy is a bit like, oh, great, let me jump in because I know what this is like. Now you're both at the bottom of the well looking up and going, we're both flooded now, right? And compassion is, hey, I'll send a ladder down. I'll teach you one by one how to climb it up. And I'll wait here. And when you come out, we can talk about it, right? We can be here. And that's the bit where you're leading with presence first, not with the part that blends with you, that knows something of the pain, right? But you can't help it. We are social creatures. We are wired for it. But with this presence, and that's how we can be actually truly useful to our clients.
And so when we talk about the difference between the self-leadership, which is getting to kind of acting from a position of self versus a part, and then this non-dual self-realization bit, spirituality is often, we circumnavigate it, especially in a clinical context, because of perceptions of woo-woo. So how do you define spirituality in a way that is permissible and accessible in a clinical context, and create a means to explore it that feels safe for
Yeah.
both the practitioner and the person who's in the room?
The first and foremost thing to say is that it is a unique thing to each and every person that feels called to go on this path, to kind of really meet the part of them that feels so soul deep lost, right? Like there's something so deep inside of me that just cannot feel satisfied, no matter how much therapy I do, no matter how safe I feel. So each and every person will have the unique flavor of that. And it's not necessarily a word. For me, it's more of a felt sense. And some of the ways that I get that across in sessions to my clients is I'll say, what was the thing you did when you were a child that helped the hours pass by? They go, oh, yeah, I seemed to be in flow. I was just enjoying myself. There wasn't an outcome. I wasn't trying to be good. I wasn't trying to get ahead. I was just present. So if I was to actually in this moment to give it a word, it would be presence. Would have to be presence. Often people, when they look at a beautiful sunset, a sunrise, look into the newborn baby's eyes, there is something transcendental about it. I can't place a word on it, but it has a different felt quality.
So it's not what you're doing, it's how you're feeling. It's accessing
Exactly
a
that.
feeling.
That's right. Yes. So it's a very practical thing. It's a very, very practical thing. It's a thing that we can embody, and it's a thing that we as therapists can transmit. One of the ways we could put it is if we lead with presence and then bring our modalities with it. But presence is first. That has a very different felt sense. There's something a little bit unique about that. And clients will often comment, will say, wow, I don't know what just happened here, but I feel so safe.
Yeah.
And I'm just sitting here, just,
Laura, it's been incredible talking to you. I think the call to action to put presence at the heart of practice will resonate with many, and I'm definitely keen to explore around that theme with you more. Just before I let you go, we've got one quick question that we ask all of our podcast guests. I think I've probably got a flavour of where we'll go with this. But if we zoom out and look at the kind of macro context, the fear, the anxiety, the fracture, whether that's geopolitical, climate, if we come down then into kind of countries and the polarization and disconnection that we see, even with people who we might identify with as easily identify with, there's lots of kind of fractured relationships and fragmentation. Then we come down to our immediate kind of communities and societies, our relationships with our peers, our families, our significant others, and ourselves. There's lots of forces that are creating dissatisfaction, discomfort, fear, anxiety, doubt. If there was a single lever for change or a button that you could push that would be the catalyst for the kind of change that we need to see, what would that be?
It would have to be presence within and presence without. It would always have to be. There's that beautiful Lao Tzu quote that I wish maybe you could put it in the podcast notes. And he says, if there is to be peace in the country, there must be peace in communities. If there is to be peace in communities, there must be peace in the family. If there is to be peace in the family, there must be peace in the parents. And if there is to be peace in the parents, there must be peace in the heart. And it's about, right, and it's taking it out, back in, and it's saying it's within. It's always going to be within. And if your flame has gone out, it's been broken, it's been fractured, then sit with someone else who can reignite that flame for you. And that may well be through methods and theories. More often than not, I've seen silence and presence speak and make magic. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you, Laura. It's been a pleasure having you on today. We'll see you soon. Thank you.